All right, welcome to the December 2024 Lunch and Learn. Today we're going to talk a little bit about bottle closures and then mostly corks and screw caps because those are by far the most widely used, at least here in the Midwest. But I will mention a couple of other types of bottle closures. My point with this webinar, with this presentation, which is kind of my point with most of these lunch and learn presentations, is not to make you go and change what you're already doing. I don't think I don't think that's in the cards for most people realistically, but to get you thinking. You might be bringing new products online that maybe you'd like to package them differently. Or, you may be noticing that the price of whatever packaging you're using is going up, and maybe slowly over time you'd be interested in changing. And sometimes pieces of equipment come available for good prices, and so maybe it's on the fly you need to decide you want to make a change. So yeah, I just thought I'd like to give you some background. I think I'll say this. I think corks are making a comeback. I think they had a little bit of a bad rap there for a while. But I think yeah, I don't think that the negativity surrounding corks is gonna completely hold up. Okay, so let's jump into this. Just as a reminder, oxidation and reduction in wines. So oxidation, we're talking about when oxygen is present, either dissolved in the wine itself, and then it can actively contribute to oxidation, or it could be in the headspace of your wine bottles. And so it can react, oxygen can not directly react, it reacts with phenolics, but and generate some reactive species that then can react with other wine components. So you can get off flavors like nutty or bruised apple, which are desirable in some wine types like sherry, but for the most part, most of our still wines we don't want those flavors. And it can lead to brown color sometimes. So enzymatic browning is what usually happens during the crushing process. And so you release some enzymes from the grapes. And these enzymes can oxidize some polyphenolic compounds that are largely important for color and give some browning to your juice. That can be fixed, let's say. First of all, you can cooling your juices down while you are cold settling them. But you can also, there are some fining agents that you could use to drop out some of that brown color if that happens to you. Chemical oxidation is usually what we're talking about post-fermentation and aging and things like that. So hydrogen peroxide is formed by reactions with phenolic compounds, and that hydrogen peroxide is what is really, really reactive and can go out and interact with other wine components. There are mechanisms, chemistry drawn mechanisms for both of these all over the internet. We don't need to really get into that today. I just want to remind you, because this is what we're talking about a lot when we're talking about bottle closures and why you choose one versus the other. Reduction in terms of wine is usually when volatile sulfur compounds are formed due to a lack of oxygen. And so there's usually a balance, especially during fermentation. But when we're talking about bottling and whatnot, you can have a buildup, and we'll talk about screw cap because this is where some people talk about reduction. The screw cap itself isn't going to lead to reduction, but the no oxygen permeability could lead to some chemical reactions happening in your wine and leading to a little bit of reductive qualities. Reductive aromas. I find that usually they blow off pretty quickly with a screw cap, you know, if you pour out a glass of wine and give it a good swirl. But it depends. And so usually what we're talking about is H2S and other sulfur compounds that are contributors. Reduction is and oxidation are chemical terms, and there is a specific chemistry definition. But when we're talking about wine, it's we use those words a little bit more loosely. So what are the options we have when we're talking about packaging? So I know this is a flow chart, or not a flow chart, but a hierarchy chart, I guess. And of things that I was thinking about when you're talking about packaging, you want to talk about your container material. Are you going to use glass bottles, bag and box, which I don't think many people are doing in the Midwest, but it's definitely an option if anybody wants to do large format. Um, Aluminum cans are kind of making a bit of a splash, let's say. I think they're good for um, certain social events, let's say, where bringing glass bottles is not really a good idea. Glass bottles are also fairly heavy. I will say though, glass bottles are not going away. Glass is very good at being recycled, and so that's a good thing. And it's just it's the tradition at this point. But I do think the sustainability and the recyclability of glass is much better than some of the other options. Even, you know, aluminum cans or some of the plastic or things like that. So I do think glass bottles are here to stay. The issue with glass is the weight. And, you know, especially as people are shipping wines around the world, there's talk about that carbon footprint. Um, Labels, there's lots of, you know, options for labels. Most people are using a paper label, a 1 or 2 piece paper label. There is options though of stamping or etching onto your bottle. You could also obviously pre-print your aluminum cans. So options there. But then when it comes to closure, there's a couple of different options. You've got corks and screw caps, which is what we're mainly going to talk about today. Crown cap is becoming more popular, even for still wines. They Crown cap has obviously been used for sparkling wine for a really long time, and glass closures. And I'll show you an option for glass closures. And we'll talk about the different types of these cork and screw caps as well. So corks, like I said, are making a comeback. You know, 10, maybe even not even 10 years ago, I was a real big screw cap component, and I thought there was some issues with corks. But reading for this particular presentation, I think that the opinions are shifting. There's still obviously big screw cap users and proponents. But I think corks, like I said, are making a comeback. So corks are made from the bark of oak tree. So it's called Quercus suber, mainly grown in Portugal and Spain. And you can harvest the bark about every 10 years. So it's sustainable. You put the tree in the ground and you're going to be able to get a number of harvests from it. And then you do need to dry the bark, but that's very similar to the oak barrels as well. You need to season, and that's really just leaving it outside for a couple of years. So the bark is dried outside. So that's this picture over in the corner here for 6 years to 2 months. And then after they punch out the corks, there are some cleaning protocols that can help prevent TCA. And I think we will talk about TCA on the next slide. So I'll save that, any discussion there. But corks are one thing that's really interesting about corks is their sustainability and their, well, I would argue positive environmental impact. And so the cork tree itself provides for CO2 sequestration. So these forests are very important. It's essentially a no waste production. You might see in this picture down at the bottom, they're punching out the corks and they've got kind of the waste, they've got this leftover bark. They use that for all kinds of other cork products. And some are for wine, but some are used in other ways as well. So the no part of that cork bark is going wasted. So it's really a zero waste production. And then the forest is extremely important in Portugal and Spain, and it protects against erosion and the desertification. So right underneath Portugal and Spain, the Iberia Peninsula is the Sahara Desert, and the Sahara Desert's gonna move up if these cork forests go away. So really important, these cork forests are maintained and protected. And so I just find that really interesting. Now, why did corks kind of have in, probably the year 2000, between 2000 2010, why were corks getting a bad reputation, and why did a lot of people switch to using screw caps at that point? Well, mainly cork taint. So cork taint is a wine fault, and it's caused by the compound 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. And this compound, it has a very, very low sensory threshold. You can see here 1 to 5 nanograms per liter, which is parts per trillion. Usually when we're measuring things in wine, we're talking, I mean, we're talking grams per liter for when we're talking residual sugar or acids in wine. So parts per trillion, or when we're talking SO2, we're usually talking ppm, parts per million. So much, much, much smaller, million times smaller is parts per trillion. So very low sensory threshold. Smells like wet paper, wet dog, musty. Really kills the fruitiness of the wine. That's how I usually can tell, is on the palate, the taste and the fruitiness just dies as soon as you are tasting it. So where's the formation? How does this come about on corks? So fungus can grow on the bark, which can transform some of the lignins in the wood and create phenol. And then the phenol can can create phenol, and the phenol reacts with chlorine agents that they used to clean these corks with. Bleach and other chlorine agents are very good at getting rid of bacteria, fungus, other yeasts, molds, things like that, to clean the corks. And if you've worked in a winery now for a while, you'll know that like bleach is the absolute number one thing that cannot be in a winery. My lab manager cleaned one of the labs one day, and this is the lab, not the winery, but cleaned one of the labs with bleach, the floor. And I went and I said, never again. I said, I appreciate you cleaned the lab, and I know that it's the floor, and I know that it's effective, but please don't ever use bleach because I will freak out. I smell bleach and I automatically think like, this is bad. You're not supposed to have this. Because of this, when you work in a winery, you're not supposed to have bleach. And it's not just for corks. It's for any wood. You don't want bleach coming into contact with any wood. And so at one point, it was estimated that 1 in 10 bottles with a cork were contaminated. That is a huge number of for a company to risk, sales on. And so some companies just got fed up, and that's where screw caps were developed, is because companies were fed up with that 1 in 10 number. And the cork companies came back. They developed some new cleaning processes, ones using either UV light or other antimicrobials to clean the corks themselves. And so I haven't had a corked wine and let's just say I'm an avid wine drinker. I'll be honest. I open a couple, maybe 1 or 2 bottles a week. And I'd say probably 50% of the bottles I open have a cork. Um, and I haven't had a corked wine in quite some time. So I do think that corks are getting much better. And the way they're treating them is much better, the way they're inspecting them and everything. So that's really a positive thing to see that the cork industry reacted to this, and they really fixed a lot of things. But I will say it's not the end of TCA. It's not the end of cork taint, because there's lots of other places you can get it in your winery. You can see in this diagram down here, TCA can come from essentially any wood source, or if it's already in your winery. But barrels, pallets, wooden pallets, be very, very careful with keeping wooden pallets in your winery and close to your winemaking. And any untreated wood, I would say, and cardboard and things like that, because and bleach, no bleach, no chlorine cleaners, okay? And make sure your water's chlorine free, and that's an important point, is no chlorine in the winery, or you could develop TCA. Okay, so I think I've proved to you that hopefully that cork taint, it's still existing, it's still out there. We do need to be vigilant still, but I think corks are not necessarily the culprit anymore. So using cork as a wine closure. So first of all, corks have been used for thousands of years as a food closure. So you've probably seen the pictures of the amphorae that they would bury sometimes, or that they would carry wine around. They would put a cork stopper in the top. And that could be used for all kinds of foods, right? Oils and not just wine. But why did they use it? It's inert, it's impermeable, and I put that in quotations because it's fairly inert, it's fairly impermeable, but there are, it's wrong to say that it's definitively inert and impermeable. But they are flexible as well. They kind of mold to whatever shape your container may be. And so for glass, that ended up working out really nicely. Glass is not perfectly straight. It does have some waviness, let's say, to it. It's a natural product, right? It's not perfectly straight. And so the cork was really great at filling in and molding to the shape of the glass. So cork and glass just seem to have this kind of natural marriage, let's say, especially for wine. It was about the 1500s when they really started using it for wine. Cork has been studied extensively, and not just because of wine. Cork was the first material where we figured out that living things are made up of cells. Okay, so the first person that ever did microscopy, he looked, and this is in I want to say 1600s, he looked at cork under the microscope and realized that all living things are made up of cells. Cork is a very important historical material. So, but it also, it's not necessarily completely impermeable, right? You do get some micro-oxygenation. And so my point to show you down here, I thought these were really interesting scans of some corks, that there's some channels and some, the green is essentially open spaces. And so oxygen can very slowly, but it can diffuse through. So depending on the gases on the outside and on the inside of the bottle and that headspace, gases can diffuse in a very small way through that. And so you do get much higher permeation of oxygen through the cork in the first 4 months after bottling. So after that, you're really going to have to wait a long time to see many more changes. Um, so you do need to, if you're cellaring your wine, you're aging your wine, you do need that wine to be on its side to keep that cork slightly moist. Or else it will dry out and it completely dry out and crumble, and that's not necessarily good as well, because I said that it's inert at the top. There is some there are some compounds that could be leached into your wine from the cork, and you don't necessarily want that. It doesn't happen that often, but or in a way that is that noticeable, but you do want to keep that cork kind of in a nice, let's say, homeostatic, slightly humid way. And so you lay it down on its side, and that'll also help when you're removing it. Oftentimes on a natural cork, this cork here on the left, a wax or a sealant is used so that it's not dusty and flaky and whatnot. And so there's some integrity on the side of the cork as you're putting it into the bottle. And probably, actually, I should say the other two corks as well, a technical or a synthetic cork as well. So the one thing I do want to point out with the technical and the synthetic cork, or agglomerated, that's what I usually call technical corks. It's made up of cork. It's just little bits pressed together. Synthetic is made up of a plastic. You can see that the pores for the oxygen to diffuse through are much more regulated and much more controlled and uniform. That's the word I'm looking for. And so you can get more, you can expect the results of aging wines in these two types of corks. Okay. What else? Okay, I did want to mention some different types of cork. So natural cork is just the cork is punched right out. It may be sealed with a wax, like I said, but it's punched right out of the bark, and that's what you get. Colmated is an interesting one. It's punched right out, but those channels and those pores, especially the larger ones, are filled in with cork dust, so that it does it prevents extra oxygen ingress, let's say, and it gives a little bit more structure to the cork. So that's what colmated corks are. I just want to jump down here to agglomerated and micro-agglomerated. So they are where you've got pieces of cork that are pressed together, and micro is just a smaller version of the cork pieces. And then there's multi-piece or twin top, and so this is where you have an agglomerated cork with two pieces on either side of natural cork, and that is for aesthetic reasons, but also for to give that agglomerated cork some structure on either side. It could also be for oxygen permeability reasons as well. But you do see this in a lot of mid-range wines. It's probably cheaper than a natural cork, but you still have some integrity, let's say, like a natural cork. Champagne stoppers are pretty much all like this. They have the agglomerated top and then a twin top on, or a twin disc on the bottom. These corks are extremely compressed when put into the bottle, and that's to hold the pressure. Champagne pressure is at, I think it's 90 psi, which I always get shocked about when I hear about other things that are under pressure, because that's extremely high. And so that's why you have the wire cage as well, to hold that cork in there, because it's under extreme amount of pressure. I will talk about synthetic corks on the next slide. But I'll be honest, I was not a fan of synthetic corks until doing a little bit more research for this presentation. I think they have a lot of merit, and I know there's a lot of people that use them. So let's talk about them a little bit. They're a good option, especially in terms of price. Natural corks are not cheap. They will add a couple, a dollar, well, maybe not that much, but they will add a significant cost to your overall packaging. Um, so synthetic corks are made from polyethylene. There's two ways that you can do that. There's petroleum-based plastics, which I'll be honest, from an environmental standpoint, not great. But there are plant-based polyethylene, which are biodegradable and therefore a little bit better or a lot better of a environmental impact, which I thought is very interesting. I didn't realize there were some plant-based ones. They can be micropermeable. They can be designed. I think the ones from the red over to the blue are probably more micropermeable. They've got kind of that sponginess in the center. The ones on the left here are probably less so. So there's no TCA risk because there's no wood product. There's no phenol with these closures, and you do get a really tight seal. Which is actually one of the cons of these, is they can be really hard to pull out, and that plastic side can really stick to the side of the bottle. So they can be a little bit challenging. There's no degradation like cork. There's no need to lay a bottle with a synthetic cork on its side, and they're much more affordable than corks. Corks have to go through just the fact that you have to let them sit and dry out for 6 months to 2 years is an investment, right? You're holding on to product that you can't sell quickly, whereas synthetic corks are able to be turned out and sold very quickly. They potentially have a negative impact because of the oil, the petroleum-based plastic manufacturing. And sometimes they can be, like I said, they're hard to remove, but they are also very hard to get back in. And so this is where maybe having those alternative stoppers, or I really like the little pouring stoppers to put back in a bottle especially instead of putting a synthetic cork back in there. So yeah, I had negative views about synthetic corks for a long time. But I think I might be changing my tune a little bit. I will say a lot of people use them and then they don't put and a lot of people use corks this way as well, and don't put a foil capsule on top. A lot of people do that here in the Midwest, and I actually think that looks kind of nice. The foil capsule is traditional, but it is potentially another piece of machinery that you need, or another step in the packaging process. So, and you can get these obviously. Oh, I may have. Maybe I'm okay. What was I going to say? You can imprint on the sides of corks, and you can imprint on the sides of, I think you can imprint on the sides of these synthetic corks with your logo or things like that. So that there are those options. Okay, so let's jump into screw caps. I will do a quick, at the end, comparison of screw caps and corks. But screw caps are a big option, and they are, they really came out, like I said, in between 2000 and 2010. They became much more popular. In the 60s, Yalumba Winery in Australia was sick and tired of the issues with corks in terms of cork taint and other issues, really. And so designed these screw caps to go on wine bottles, and then really took off from there. And they're essentially the major closure for all Australia and New Zealand wines. Just as a little aside that I read, Penfolds, which is a really iconic and upper tier wine brand in Australia. In Australia, the wines are all under screw cap, but when they export to America, they put all their red wines under cork because they know that American consumers would prefer to see cork on a higher end wine. So I just thought that was interesting. There's various liners available for oxygen transfer rate. So the one thing that we always, a lot of times we talk about with screw caps is that there's no oxygen permeability. And that's essentially true. It's much, much lower than corks. And I will say this in corks as well, it's variable cork to cork. So if you really want a steady oxygen permeability, you might want to go with an agglomerated cork or a synthetic cork. There is a little bit of oxygen ingress or oxygen permeability with some of these liners. So there's the Saranex liner or the Saran tin liner, and this is what they look like inside. And so, and this is their levels of oxygen. So if you are making a wine that you want to completely protect, zero oxygen, you may want to use a Saran tin liner. I do think that if you're just ordering Stelvin, that the normal liner that comes with it is a Saranex liner. But I will say there are some issues with these liners. And this is where I think people have been on a screw cap kick because we think that it is easy to use. It's one machine to put it on. There's issues with corks. But there's some major environmental issues with screw caps that I didn't really ever consider. I use screw caps on the 3 wines that we make here at Iowa State. And it's given me some pause, to be honest with you. I have some concerns, and I will probably do a little bit more research and see if we should consider switching. But anyway, so what is that environmental impact? First of all, aluminum mining is really bad for the environment, affects air and water quality, and is a pretty dirty process, 70 million tons of waste annually. And I believe that's not just for screw caps, that's for aluminum mining. The liner that is used, let me see, for both the Saranex and a little bit on the Tin Saran liner is PVDC. It is unsustainable as a product and is toxic when it is burned. And it is to the point where I believe California is looking at controlling it. And in some countries in Europe, it is banned. So you cannot use a Stelvin screw cap for sending wines to certain European countries because they have banned this particular PVDC. They don't want it in their country. They don't want to have to deal with it because if they have to burn it, it's toxic. So something to think about. I will also say it's quite hard to get the screw cap, the neck of the screw cap off of a bottle when you go to recycle it. So I'm not really sure how they're doing that in recycling centers. Screw caps can lead to reduction, much in the same way that cork could lead to oxidation, but the screw cap itself doesn't cause this reduction. It's just that it prevents any oxygen transfer that could potentially curb any reduction. But like I said, any reduced wines, any wines that came out a little bit smelly out of a screw cap bottle, I find that you just give it a quick, it might just be building up in that headspace underneath the screw cap. I don't find that they're overtly reduced. That's my experience. There may be wines out there that have suffered from reduction under screw cap for sure. So looking at corks versus screw caps, just some pros and cons of the two. Corks, the sustainability and the renewable source, I think is really interesting and really interesting right now as we're talking about sustainability and winemaking and things like that. There's a tradition with corks. people say that they like pop, hearing the pop, or they like popping the corks. There's some cellar aging. You will get some oxygen permeability through that cork, and you may have the ability to soften, change your wines. Maybe wine aging is a topic we could cover later, and what really happens to wine as it ages. I would argue here in the Midwest and with the varieties that we grow, you may be bringing in fruit from other states that has aging potential. But the hybrid wines that we grow and make don't have the molecular components to allow for much aging. I would say 1 to 2 years, and I wouldn't. There are examples of longer aging that are totally acceptable, and wines are still good. But I wouldn't promote any of my wines to be laid down and cellared. We usually tell people, at least for the Iowa State wines, drink the wine, save the bottle, if you want. Some cons with corks. Obviously, cork taint is still a bit of an issue. I don't think they've gotten rid of it entirely, but much, much better. The variability in corks, so cork to cork, especially with natural corks, they are somewhat fragile. And the cost, they are, well, I shouldn't say the most expensive, because we're going to look at a couple of other products on the next slide, and they might be more expensive than a cork. But compared to screw caps or synthetic corks, let's say natural corks are going to be the most expensive. Pros for screw caps, their consistency, longevity. They do provide a really nice closure. The cost is better, and they're easy to open. You don't need a corkscrew. Cons, they have the potential to be reduced, the wines, a little bit. Their aging ability, if you really do want to see those changes in your wine, you're not going to. And they do have some negative environmental impacts because of that liner and the aluminum. There are some other closures out there which may be interesting to you, especially for certain specialty products that you might want to do. VinoSeal is a glass stopper, and I've had I think it's mostly rosé wines that I've gotten these glass stoppers. The nice thing with them is they work with most bottles. They just have to have a specific diameter. So with that being said, you can usually find a bottle easily to fit these, and there's all kinds of different designs. These are just the classic ones, but if you go to VinoSeal, there are lots of different options for, especially if you were doing a really special bottling of something and you wanted a really special stopper in there. The Helix is interesting. So the largest cork manufacturer in the world came out with this product. And so they're bringing a screw cap concept to cork material. So you'll see it's kind of an agglomerated cork, and you just twist it out of the bottle. You do have to have special bottles. You can kind of see in here, there's a threading that this threading on the cork needs to fit into. So these are specialized bottles, which is obviously probably an added cost. And then there's dedicated equipment. Obviously, if you have a bottling line or a monoblock bottling line, there's going to be some specialized equipment to use this. So this is a larger investment, let's say, but interesting, I think. And then the crown cap. The crown cap, it's mostly used for sparkling wine. But therefore the bottles that are designed to use with a crown cap are typically more heavy and more expensive because of that. but a lot of options with crown caps just because they're used for a lot of other products. So there are options out there for crown caps that the Vino Seal and the Helix, you know, the glass stopper, they're kind of novel, whereas the crown cap is you can, I mean, the actual cap itself is pretty cheap. The little, depending on if you want it automated or not, but the little seal, you know, the little crank sealer, is not very expensive, and it just comes down to buying different bottles at that point. Okay, so to wrap up, some questions to consider if you're thinking about, I would encourage everybody to review their packaging probably on a yearly basis. Not saying you have to change anything, but you should at least just think to yourself like, are we using the best thing here? Is this meeting our needs? So what are your packaging goals? Is it cost? Is it sustainability? Is that interesting to you? Is it ease of use for the customer? Is it aesthetics? Do you want it to look a certain way? I will say, when I looked at this particular picture between the cork and the screw cap, I thought, wow, they really don't look that different. They were, you know, it was nice when they developed the screw cap that they really left the bottle itself alone so that people still have the same aesthetic experience with between corks and screw caps. In my opinion, I don't think they look that different. Whoops. And then think about the products that you're currently making or ones that you might want to make in the future. Maybe you are planning to do a special bottling of something, and you might want to have a special or, you know, cork maybe or glass stopper or something like that. What are the machine differences to your current setup? What's if you really do want to, let's say, change from cork to screw cap or screw cap back to cork, how is that going to change your setup? What machines do you need? Can you get rid of the other machines or, you know, sell them or not? And how does that affect, you know, how long it takes to bottle and package and those kinds of things. And then do you need to change bottles? There's lots of screw cap bottles out there available. There's lots of cork bottles out there available. What's the price on those? You know, price difference. Does it make up for the difference in the closure price? So yeah, just some questions to consider as you're maybe looking at what packaging you're using and reviewing if that works, if that's continuing to work for you. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up here and we'll stop recording here in a second, but I do want to say January 6th will be our next Lunch and Learn. And I want to talk about malolactic fermentation. I think I've gotten some questions recently about malolactic, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. Not as many people are doing it that I think should be doing malolactic. So I think let's jump into that. February 3rd, March 3rd, and April 7th. I'm open for topics. Please let me know what you'd like to hear about, including vineyard topics. We're happy to get some people in to talk about various vineyard vineyard topics. And yeah, contact us. So got my email up there, our website. Please feel free to also, Sarah Pirtle is on the call. She's our new education and outreach specialist. She's happy to interact with everybody and answer questions and provide resources. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. That's where this recording will be on YouTube. So please look for that. There's lots of other videos that are from past webinars and lunch and learns and from other things we've done. Okay, so Jossie, I think we can stop recording. I'm gonna stop.